Is the TCU wide receiver room deep this year, or is it another season where they're lacking a true number one option? We'll talk about that next on Lockdown Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever it is you get your podcasts. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're coming up on 1,100 subscribers, which is really cool. I think you get some sort of plaque or award when you do that. Also, we're available wherever you listen to podcasts, just in its regular old-timey audio form. You can subscribe on those different platforms as well. Welcome in. We're full force into spring football right now. TCU hit the practice field again yesterday. Second time they've done that this spring. Ken Seals, backup quarterback, but at the moment functioning as QB1 as Josh Hoover is out with an injury. He spoke with the media for the first time since coming back home. He's originally from Azle and played a few seasons at Vanderbilt and is now back in Fort Worth with the TCU Horned Frogs going through spring camp. So I'll get to his comments in segment 2. Actually, it looks like maybe I didn't change up the rundown of the show. So I'm going to do that quickly. If you'll just bear with me here. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see some different things going on. But I want to talk first today about the wide receiver room. And last offseason, and then into the season as well, I spent a lot of time discussing that I thought this was going to be a deep wide receiver room. You know, obviously you were losing Quentin Johnston from the year before, which was a massive loss. But you had some new guys come in like John Paul Richardson, JoJo Earl, Savion Williams was returning. And I felt like it could be a good mix of players. And I think something I sort of got bogged down in during the offseason and the end of the year, was that there wasn't like a true alpha. There wasn't a true number one option, a true number one guy throughout the season. And sometimes narratives can be kind of lazy. And one thing that I've sort of shifted my view on this, I do think it's important to have a go-to wide receiver, somebody you can trust. I feel like TCU had that in John Paul Richardson last year, but it was in the slot position, which is typically not where you see that guy, even though it can be. As the year progressed, Savion Williams really came into his own and got better. He had a huge game against Texas. Had a few other games last season where he was special. Josh Hoover gets thrown into the mix mid-season, and so that kind of threw off things. And then Sonny Dykes mentioned multiple times last year his frustration that guys just simply weren't at practice, right? You had a lot of dudes that were in and out of the lineup due to injury. And so some of the veterans that they maybe counted on to do some big things like Warren Thompson or Dalen Wright. Dalen Wright is back this season. They just weren't available to go through those reps with the QB. Savion Williams missed some time in camp, so he didn't really look like himself, especially in that Colorado game where he struggled, as a lot of guys did. You had a good tight end in Jared Wiley. But one thing that they were missing was a true vertical threat, right? Like they never really got into the downfield passing game, which Kendall Briles overall, especially during his time at Baylor, his offense functioned at their best when they were able to make big plays in the passing game. Going deep and going vertical down the field was a huge aspect of it. Now that sort of changed when he was in Arkansas, but Arkansas had a robust run game, and they kind of supplemented with that. In a big part of their run game was the ability to allow KJ Jefferson to also use his legs, which once Chandler Morris went down, that wasn't really a factor with Josh Hoover at the helm. They had a couple opportunities. Like I remember the Texas Tech game, Josh missed Savion a couple times going down the field. But by and large, this was just not an offense that created splash plays down the field. And usually if they did, it was a catch and run type situation. So, against West Virginia on their first drive of the game, Chandler Morris hits John Paul Richardson in the middle of the field. He breaks a couple tackles, takes it to the house. Against BYU, first drive of the game, similar thing. Hoover hits Richardson. He's able to spin out of a tackle, take it to the house. But there really wasn't a whole lot in terms of true timing, throwing it down the field, 50-50 balls, that type of thing. I think the Baylor game, Josh hit Savion on a deep pass. I know against Houston, Chandler hit Warren Thompson, I believe it was, down the sidelines for a touchdown. but that was really it. I mean, there just weren't a lot of plays. 2 seasons ago, they really thrived with the ability to just go deep to Quentin Johnston. And so I'm not sure the issue was so much that they didn't have like a true alpha or a true go-to receiver. It was more the fact that a lot of the receivers they had weren't able to stretch the field. And we had somebody comment on YouTube yesterday because we were talking about spring practice and guys that stood out. And Tyler Jones said that TCU has decent wide receivers, a lot of possession receivers, but certainly no proven over-the-top game breakers. And so that can be a big concern going into this year. Now, the way I would counter that is, one, they brought in Eric McAllister, who did a really good job of that at Boise State. Now, it was at a different school, different level, right? But, I mean, he put up almost 1,000 yards at Boise State in 8 games. He had a couple games last season where he had 200-plus yards. He showed the ability to go down the field and make plays. So I think they're hoping he can do some of that. Some guys that Sonny mentioned yesterday, one was Major Everhart, just looking different. Now, Major is not your prototypical big, tall outside wide receiver, so it might be done in a different way, but I think you can get some explosiveness from him. I think Savion can be a vertical threat. I feel like he's fast. He's got the size. He's got the body control to do it. They just have to give him more opportunities and hope that the timing between him and Josh Hoover is better going into the season. I feel like Drake Dabney can be, someone that you can use over the middle of the field. Typically, it's going to be, moving the chains, that type of thing. But he had a really good game last year against Kansas State when he was at Baylor, where he put up some big plays. And another name to know, and this is a guy, I talked about Marcel Brooks yesterday. What kind of expectations can you really place on him? Because throughout his career, he's dealt with injuries. Dalen Wright was a player that made some big plays for them when healthy last season. And unfortunately, he was just kind of constantly banged up in and out of the lineup. And there were a lot of players that were like that. But Dalen's a dude that made some plays, and it was sort of the similar story at Minnesota. He had a big game against Ohio State a few years back. He had great moments. There just wasn't a ton of consistency. I remember when it was announced he was going to transfer over here, I messaged Kane Robb, who hosts Locked On Golden Gophers and also covers Minnesota for the Rivals Network. And I was like, hey, could you just tell him? I wanted to have him on the show, but it didn't work out and with timing and scheduling. And so I just said, hey, could you just give me kind of a rundown of who Dalen Wright is, what you think about him, et cetera. And he was like, yeah, I mean, Dalen's one of those guys that if you talk to players on the team, like you walk on the practice field, he's one of the people that stands out just because he's physically really built well. You talk to players on the team and they're like, that's an absolute dog. Like he makes plays. He can do special things. It was just a matter of whether or not he was going to be available and able to stay on the field. You also have Braylon James coming in. So I think there's some guys, Tyler, that can do that. But I guess you are right in the fact that outside of Eric McAllister and Savion Williams to a certain degree, there's not a lot of proven talent as far as, being a threat down the field and really giving you that option in the deep ball game. CJ said 5 wide with Savion, Eric McAllister, Braylon James, Major, and JPR would be really scary. I mean, that's a good group, and I think it's a decent mixture of guys that can run different aspects of the route tree. I do wonder how much they go empty this year because that was something that they featured a lot with Josh. I mean, we talked about this before, but they really transitioned more to kind of a true air raid system when Josh Hoover took over, which was pretty similar to what he did at Rockwall Heath. I think this is a deep wide receiver room again, though, and hopefully this is a season where there's a better mix of, yes, you have guys that can move the chains, that can make plays, that can do what you want them to do at a high level, but you also have the ability to make things happen down the field, have the threat of the deep ball, because if you can make those splash plays like that in the passing game, that's also really going to help your run game, which is a place where you have some unproven commodities again with Trey Sanders coming back, Cam Cook emerging as most likely your lead back this year. And then a guy like Trent Battle, who's had some run and some snaps before, alongside some young players like Nate Palmer and Jeremy Payne who are hitting the ground running as true freshmen this upcoming season. But I think this is going to be a good wide receiver room this year. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you think about that position group, who you feel like could be the leader in the clubhouse. I saw Savion have a great catch in either a one-on-one drill or 7-on-7 situation against Lamarian James, the corner from Old Dominion who transferred in this offseason. It was great coverage. The ball was to the outside shoulder, and Savion just leaped up and in one hand snagged it. He's a special talent. And I feel like as the year went on, one of the underrated storylines, because the team was struggling, so it was kind of hard to find the positives sometimes, but he became like the type of player, type of receiver that we thought he could be going into the season. And if he can emerge this year along with Eric McAllister on the outside, and you have solid production returning at your slot positions, and then you also got guys like JoJo Earl, who you're hoping to integrate more in the offense this season, Jordan Bailey, Major Everhart, there's a chance for explosiveness, even if it's not in the more traditional, like just throwing it down the field to guys on a post or a fade or all those types of things. There's opportunities to get players in space and have them make plays, which should bode well for this offense this upcoming season. When we come back, one of the quarterbacks, as Josh Hoover is sitting out, but one of the QBs did talk with the media yesterday. I'll recap some of his thoughts next on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. What ad read do we have here? I'm asking rhetorically because I should know. Oh, of course. It's our friends at FanDuel. NCAA tournament going on. Sweet 16 weekend coming up. Major League Baseball about to get in full swing. Rangers open the season on Thursday. Your defending world champion, Texas Rangers. NBA playoffs are getting ready to start up as well. It's a perfect time to join FanDuel. If you're sitting there and you're like, man, my bracket's already busted. It's been a pretty chalk NCAA tournament so far, actually. But if you were heavy on there's parity this year, I think there's going to be some upsets, and you lost some Sweet 16 teams, you maybe lost a team already in the Final Four, then it's the perfect time to join FanDuel, because if you get one $5 bet, you put down one $5 bet and you win, you get $200 in bonus bets. That's right. Your first $5 bet wins, and you get $200 in bonus bets, $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon or the FanDuel app. Bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Again, one $5 bet that you win. If you win on that first $5 bet, it leads to $200 in bonus bets. That's a great return on investment, as we say in the business world. FanDuel, proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. I don't know a lot about vehicles. I'm not ashamed to say that. I can feel overwhelmed sometimes. Something's wrong with my car because I'm Googling, like, okay, what's this noise about? What's going on? eBay Motors has got me covered, and it can have you covered too. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle or level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Over 122 million parts for your ride, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're earning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Motors, that Guaranteed Fit program, only available to U.S. customers. Keep that in mind. eBay Motors. Get the right parts for your vehicle and do it today. So Ken Seals spoke with the media yesterday. Ken Seals made 22 starts in the SEC, and Sonny talked about just the advantage or the benefit of having somebody with that type of experience coming to TCU, being part of the quarterback room. And Ken spoke about getting a lot of reps in the spring practice. He spoke about a number of things, and he really started by talking about the fact that he grew up a TCU fan. He's from the area. And so he grew up a TCU fan, ended up Vandy, but when the portal happened, Kendall Browse reached out. It was an opportunity to come see his family. They were pumped up about the fact that he was going to be back, close to them and in a good situation again. And so he left Vandy. He's here, and he's learning the offense. He said they've been working hard for the last few months, or he's been working hard specifically on getting up to speed, getting the terminology. One interesting thing that he noted was that the offense is clicking really well right now, that they're making plays against this defense. And you would expect that. I mean, you expect the offense in year 2 of this system to have some advantages over the defense at the moment. He felt like he could have some real conversations with the guys that have been here about the intricacies of the offense, because as far as install goes, like, they're ahead of the game. Well, he's learning still some of the sets and plays and all that. These guys that have been around, they're coming in with a lot of confidence. And hopefully that's something that really pays off for TCU. Sonny mentioned that there were players on that side of the ball that looked really good to open spring practice, just simply because they have experience. They know what they're doing. They understand their role. And so it's easier just to read and react. You want your athletes to just go out there and react and not have to think a lot and process, okay, what do I have to do? What's the situation? Ken says he hasn't played tempo like this since middle school or high school, but it's coming back to him pretty quickly as far as getting them to the line, calling out formations, calling out protections, making sure everybody's on the same page there. That's my biggest concern with this O-line. You obviously need it to come together and for the group to be good just as a unit, physically getting pushed, making things happen. But also the idea of, if you got 5 new guys out there, which it seems like Colton Deary has actually been working at center. I mentioned that maybe he'd be a guard this year, but he's been working at center at the moment. And if you have 5 new guys out there, are they going to all see the same things, communicate well, understand those protections? I would expect some growing pains in the first few weeks of the season, but that's a huge part of, just learning. And it's something that you really can't get a feel for until things are live and real and it's happening in front of you. But Seal says that he's got a good understanding of that, and it's coming to him, quickly and becoming easier. And then he said the vibe in the quarterback room is really good. That obviously they're disappointed that Josh Hoover had to have surgery, but the guys are really supportive. They lift together. They work out together. They talk with each other about what they're seeing within the offense, what they're seeing on the field. That Haas Haney is in a really good spot. Just he's very mature for his age, that he understands what he needs to do. He's learned the offense, but physically, like, he has all the tools and he can make plays. And that he's been in quarterback rooms before where that hasn't been the case, where guys haven't been supportive of one another, pushing one another, trying to make people better. And so that's a huge benefit for this team going forward. Again, you can't really replace, like, you'd love to have Hoover out there taking the majority of these first team reps. You can't replace that. You can't get it back. But it sounds like he's saying really mentally engaged and involved, that he's doing what he can from a mental rep standpoint. And that's really all you can ask from him in this situation. But yeah, it was good to hear from Ken Seals. I mean, you can see on the video when you watch it and just when you hear him talk, you can see the maturity level. He's just a guy that gets it. He's been through process like this before, and I feel like this was a really good pickup. Now we'll kind of see what the temperature is and what the read on things are when this next portal window comes out. But I really feel like they're pretty set at the QB spot. They've got a guy that can be a really good, solid backup and be a good sounding board for Josh Hoover. They have a young player that has a lot of talent, and then they have Josh coming back after half a season last year and the majority of this offseason before he had to take a break because of his health, getting after it and making plays and making things happen. So good report so far from the QB room and from this offense in general. Another note before we go to break here. So TCU's got a new running backs coach, right? Jimmy Smith came in from Arkansas. And yesterday some news came down that Jamarion Parker from St. Louis, Missouri, running back, who was committed to Arkansas, he is decommitted from the Hogs. He's got a really good offer list. And according to 247 Sports, he's going to make an official visit to Nebraska later this spring. And he's also been in contact with TCU, and he's working on getting a date set with them as well. So TCU suddenly now involved, it seems like, in the recruitment of 4-star running back Jamarion Parker, who had a good relationship with Jimmy Smith and committed to the Hogs before Jimmy left for TCU. So, One thing with Anthony Jones leaving, obviously he was a good coach. He was also just a really good recruiter and brought in talent every year. So it seems like Coach Smith is hitting the ground running in that regard and already reaching out and making things happen with guys that he had a prior relationship with, which will be a big deal for TCU moving forward as they try to continue and build this 2025 class, which is slowly coming together. I also saw Ty Hawkins, 2025 quarterback commit for the Frogs, had a really good showing at the Elite 11 regional competition in Austin. So good news from him, and he gets ready for his senior season, try to put things together and put some more good things on tape before moving on to TCU, hopefully next spring. We'll come back and wrap things up with some thoughts from you guys. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. It's time for our March Madness highlight moment, brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Nissan's got new SUVs out, the Pathfinder, the Armada, and the Rogue. 2024 line of SUVs are now available. Go to nissanusa.com, and you can shop today, and that's nissanusa.com, and you can shop today. The NC State Wolfpack are this week's Nissan Rogue. The team surprised us all with powerful performance in the first two games of the tournament. Wins over Texas Tech and Oakland have set them up to play Marquette in the Sweet 16. They say, win life, go Rogue, and that's exactly what the Wolfpack have done here. Take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and find your next big adventure. Shop at nissanusa.com. Get ready for your next big adventure with our friends at Nissan. nissanusa.com. You can go to that website today and start shopping. Nissan, it's where adventure starts. Thank you to our friends there for bringing us our March Madness highlight. Before we wrap up, I wanted to get some thoughts from you guys. You can always chime in the YouTube comments. You can tweet at me at SimcockSteven or the show at LockedOnTCU. Username Devil Frog. Haven't seen that one before. That's interesting. They said we should be fine at running back and wide receiver. My concern is O-line, QB, and tight end. I wouldn't really worry about tight end at all. I think Drake Dabney's going to be good. He's going to step in and be ready immediately. Had a really good season last year at Baylor. Had very similar receiving numbers to Jared Wiley. Also got DeAndre Rogers, who did some nice things for the Frogs last year. And then Lafayette Caraway, who will be a sophomore, maybe, I guess, a redshirt freshman because he didn't play last season, who was really talented coming out of high school, dealt with some injuries, and so didn't play last season. But I actually think they're going to be good at tight end. Now, yeah, O-line, I have concerns about. I think that's really kind of the make or break thing with how good this offense is going to be this upcoming season. How well do those guys come together? Do you get the best five out there in good positions for them to succeed? Totally agree there. And then quarterback, I know some people are concerned about Hoover. We'll see what happens. I'm pretty optimistic. I feel like TCU did a nice job last season of putting him in situations to succeed. Now, it's totally fair to have questions about him. I mean, they won 2 games last year with him at the helm, and it was against BYU and Baylor. Two of BYU's pretty average team last season. Baylor was one of the worst teams in the league. And he had good moments in some of those losses, like a really good second half against Texas, but part of the reason they were way behind in that game was because of some mistakes and interceptions he threw. They were really never in the game against Oklahoma. He put up some good numbers and made some plays, but the offense wasn't efficient enough. And so I think this offseason, though, has been really focused on building an offense around him that's going to work and then getting better on defense and in turn making life easier for him. So I feel like all that is super positive and reasons to be optimistic. But yes, fair to have questions about Josh and the QB room as a whole. Doug says he's already looking forward to next football season. We were blessed a few years back with a CFP College World Series and NCAA tournament. It's so easy to expect that. Baseball isn't done. I'm hoping for some magic to save the season. Yeah, I kind of joked at the beginning of the show yesterday, is baseball season already over? I know it's not. I realize it's a long year. But 2-7 is a significant hole to climb out of. Now, you got 2 series against Houston and Cincinnati, which in theory are 2 teams that are at the bottom of the Big 12. Right now, TCU is also at the bottom of the Big 12. And, yeah, they've played some good teams, but they also haven't been super competitive. So I don't know what to expect. But I think you got to win. You got to string together some wins here. And really, like, even going 4-2 over the next 6, it's going to help, but it might not be enough. I mean, you need to try to go 5-1, which would be tough to do the way they're playing ball. But no, it's not over, and they had a great bounce back last year. And I realized that there's still stuff to happen. One user said, I will say one thing about basketball. We talked about, obviously, TCU falling to Utah State. Fans don't travel at all. He drove 4 hours from Michigan to Indy for the tourney game, and the fans that sat in the bowl were extremely lifeless compared to Utah State. It was honestly a little disappointing. I mean, I get that. I think TCU's investment in basketball has really picked up over the past decade. I think there's still room to grow. You know, one thing that I guess disagreed with about or people, there were a lot of people that said this year or talked this year about how talented this team was. I thought this team had some talent, but I still felt like, you know, obviously Houston, Baylor, Iowa State, Kansas, there are a lot of schools in the Big 12 that had better personnel than TCU did this year. Now, some guys that they got in the transfer portal with high expectations didn't live up to it, but overall, this was a pretty limited offensive team, and then defensively, they struggled as well. And so some of that's coaching, obviously. Like, a lot of that falls on Jamie and the coaching staff, but some of it falls on the players too. And so I think they got to increase the talent level as well. And that's kind of goes back to resources and what you invest in the program. So that's going to be a challenge for the coaching staff and the people that are, you know, supporting that this offseason. We'll be back tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team. We do it here every day.